This is Perspectives, a bi-weekly investment podcast brought to you by Escala Partners. In a world cluttered with information, Perspectives cuts through the noise to bring you insights and commentary on global financial markets, economics, and geopolitical news and events.
Welcome to Escala Partners Investment Perspectives. Today, we're going to focus on a key tenet, and that's trust. It's what lets us accelerate into a blind curve at 100 kilometres an hour, believing the road will hold, the tyres will grip, and the machine will respond. But it's not just on two wheels. Trust is what keeps financial markets running, democracy stable, and relationships intact. And when that trust breaks, whether in a corner or in a crisis, things fall apart fast. Right now, we're seeing it everywhere. Systems stalling, markets freezing, and alliances fraying. So today, I'm joined by our CIO, Tracey McNaughton, and together we're asking, is trust still holding us up? Or are we leaning into a curve on a machine we no longer believe will carry us through? And with that, welcome Tracey.
Hi, Ed.
So Tracey, how do you define trust?
Well, that's a good question, Ed. I think trust is the expectation that someone or something will do what they say no matter what. So I think it's not so much about getting it right or about perfection. It's more about that reliability factor. You know, trust is knowing that your tires will grip. It's about knowing that your money is safe in the bank. It's about knowing that the legal system will protect your rights, even when the outcome doesn't go your way. I think that's what trust is to me, Ed.
So Tracey, can you think of a single system, financial, political, or social, that functions without trust?
No, I can't. And if you don't trust that your money will be there tomorrow, that institutions will hold, or that people will act in good faith, well, then you freeze, don't you? And in a world as uncertain as the one we're living in now, trust isn't just helpful, it's absolutely essential. It's what keeps systems moving when everything else feels unpredictable.
So let's go back to 2008. Where were you, Tracey, when Lehman Brothers collapsed? And did it hit you right away that this was a trust crisis?
I was working at Baillie Gifford in Edinburgh, and for us at the time, it was definitely a trust issue because we bought Lehman Brothers bonds on the Friday before the Sunday night that they declared bankruptcy. And the thesis for this purchase was that the US government had rescued Bear Stearns. At the time, Bear were the fifth largest bank in the US, Lehman was number 3. And so we believed that by rescuing the fifth largest bank, they were ruling a line in the sand, and everything above that line would be rescued. That belief, as it turned out, was misplaced. So there was trust that was broken there. In a broader context, the GFC was as severe as it was because there was a lack of trust between the banks themselves. They didn't want to lend to each other because they didn't trust that they would get paid back.
And the stats reflect that. Only 27% of Americans said at the time they trusted the financial system. Bernanke was the chair of the Federal Reserve at the time. His first move wasn't to inject capital, it was to calm people down.
Exactly, right. Because capital only moves if confidence exists. The Latin root of the word credit is to trust. In order for credit, the lifeblood of the financial system, what drives the economy, in order for that to flow, there needs to be trust.
And that's the thing with trust. It's invisible when it works, but when it fails,
it fails fast. Exactly. And without warning. Banks stopped lending to each other, not because they lacked capital, but because they couldn't trust each other's balance sheet. They didn't believe what was being reported. When interbank trust breaks, the entire financial circulatory system stops pumping. And that's the paradox. Money didn't stop flowing because it wasn't available. It stopped flowing because nobody trusted it would come back if they lent it out. So without trust, there is no credit. Without credit, there's no growth in the economy.
Let's zoom out for a minute now. We've talked about trust in institutions, but what about trust between countries? You saw that on display at the G7 recently in Canada. President Trump walked out mid-session again. Cameras rolled as he boarded Air Force One early, leaving key negotiations unfinished. The summit momentarily became the G6.
Yes, and the optics were dramatic, weren't they? But the message behind it was loud and clear. US leadership is now unpredictable. A leaked EU Council memo in April described the US as a, quote, volatile partner whose long-term commitment to Article 5 cannot be assumed under current leadership. It's no longer something allies can trust over the long term. And so they're planning around that uncertainty.
And so what does that look like in practice?
Well, it's all about multipolarity now. Everyone is or has a plan B. Germany and France are doubling down on the idea of a European defense force separate from NATO's US-led structure. In March, French President Macron reiterated his call for European strategic sovereignty, proposing a 20% increase in the EU's defence production budget by 2027. Germany's defence minister supported expanding the European Sky Shield initiative. That's an air defence program that operates independently of US systems. There's a push for greater strategic autonomy, not just militarily, but in energy, in technology, and even in currency systems.
And what about trade?
Yes, the EU is actively pursuing deals with the ASEAN bloc of countries and with India. These are pacts the US would have been central to a decade ago, but now they're being negotiated without Washington at the table.
So, Tracey, is this a retreat from US leadership?
Well, it is at the very least, it's a recalibration. If you're a policymaker in Europe or the Indo-Pacific, you can't build long-term plans on a partner who might reverse course every 4 years or even every 4 days. So you hedge. Defense partnerships no longer run solely through NATO. Trade routes are being redesigned to avoid choke points and dependency. Global financial infrastructure is evolving. Regional development banks, non-dollar settlements are starting to be talked about. I think, let's be honest, American foreign policy has become reactive and unpredictable. And unpredictability might serve a domestic political strategy, but on the world stage, it drains trust. The consequences of this is that NATO partners start sourcing weapons from new suppliers. Asia-Pacific nations hedge their bets. Just look at AUKUS. Initially, it was framed as a deep strategic alignment between Australia, the UK, and the US, a signal of long-term Western cohesion in the Indo-Pacific. But now, even within AUKUS, there is anxiety. Australia is asking hard questions about delivery timelines, technology sharing, and what happens if American leadership changes course again. Japan is signing separate defense deals. We've got Japan and Asia have expanded bilateral defense exercises, citing regional stability concerns. India is strengthening ties with France. Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam are pushing regional security talks that exclude both China and the US, focused on non-aligned Indo-Pacific cooperation. So it's not abandonment as such, but it is diversification, because when trust erodes, resilience becomes a multi-option strategy.
And of course, while allies hedge, rivals act.
Yes, exactly. China's Belt and Road Initiative is evolving to become more strategic. They're building ports, railways, and telecom infrastructure, all in the global south. So this is countries like Kenya, Chile, and Bangladesh. And increasingly, what's most interesting is that those deals are being signed not in US dollars, but in Chinese yuan. Beijing has taken concrete steps to position itself as a mediator to stabilize conflict, and in particular, taking a role in the Middle East amid the Israel-Iran conflict.
And underneath all of that is, of course, the erosion of trust.
Yeah, right. This isn't just about military budgets or trade flows. It's about the disappearance of a shared assumption that America will show up and stay consistent and act in line with its long-term commitments.
So, Tracey, I'll put the big question to you. What if trust, not military power, not GDP, was the real engine of American leadership, and that engine stalling?
Well, here's the uncomfortable truth. For decades, the US-led global order wasn't just held together by military strength or economic scale. It was held together by trust. Trust that American leadership would be stable, even across administrations. Trust that treaties would be honored. Trust that crises would be met with coordination, not withdrawal. When that trust frays, you get what we're seeing now, a shift away from a unipolar world and towards a more fractured, a more multipolar one.
So let's come down from the G7 and walk into an advisor's office. We've spoken about trust between institutions and their clients, between the US and its allies. What about trust in our world, Tracey, between the advisor and their client?
I think, Ed, we know the answer to that. An advisor's greatest asset, and one that is worth protecting, is the trust they have with their client. A 2024 Australian study found that 94% of advised clients believe their advisor acts in their best interest. So 94%. As we've just discussed, this trust is something that cannot be taken for granted. So Ed, let me throw it back to you. Let me ask you something. When you ask any of your clients what built their trust, what do you hear back?
Well, Tracey, it's a combination of factors, but definitely something that's earned over time. It's about repeatedly doing the right things in all circumstances. So feedback we've heard is comments like, you called when markets dropped. So you can't just be a bull market advisor. You have to communicate during the ups and downs. And understanding and listening is key. Each recommendation needs to be specific to each client and consider their circumstances. So comments like, go ahead, you know me, are also very pleasing to hear. But it's not just about investments, it goes further than that. It's nice to get to know clients on a personal level and vice versa.
Yeah, trust at this level isn't abstract. It's built person to person, as you've just described, over time through attention, empathy, and follow through. It's not something that should be gambled with. Again, the most valuable asset a bank has, a government has, or an advisor has is trust. It's not the portfolio. It's not the product list. It's not the CIO team, as much as I'd like to say that, Ed. It's the client's trust. And like any high-performing asset, it's both powerful and fragile. One missed call in a crisis, one product that's pushed too hard, one sign that the advisor is managing to a sales target instead of the client's life goals. That's all it takes to fracture years of credibility. And once it's gone, there's no spreadsheet that brings it back. So it's interesting, Ed, at times like now, when trust is more important than ever, it's worth remembering. Are you treating client trust like something earned or something assumed? Because it should be treated like capital, earned slowly, protected fiercely, and never gambled. Good advisors, like yourself, Ed, understand this. They never gamble on the trust they have with their clients. They preserve it with the same discipline they apply to managing risk, because ultimately, trust is the client's real return.
So let me shift gears now. literally and talk about trust as it relates to something close to your heart. Like every other relationship we've talked about here, trust on two wheels isn't abstract, it's visceral.
You know, just talking about writing it brings a smile to my face. You are completely right. There has to be absolute trust between you and the motorcycle. You know what, we have spoken about what happens when trust breaks down or is gambled away, bad performance happens and risk soars. I had an unfortunate experience on Sunday. I witnessed a young man on a bike come off on a bend right in front of me. He was a P-plater, and just prior to his fall, I remember thinking, keep your distance from these guys because they're taking a bit too much risk and could come unstuck. This man in particular gambled with the trust he had with his bike and failed. Fortunately, he was fine. I stopped and flagged to the traffic behind to slow down, caution ahead. But he gambled and lost and ended up on his back on the tarmac. When you're leaning into a curve at 100 k's an hour, you're trusting the road, the machine, the tires, the physics, and yourself not to do anything stupid, not to gamble. The line between confidence and catastrophe is extremely thin. When you gamble with that trust on a bike, emotions take over, your performance drops, and risk skyrockets.
That blend of human emotion and mechanical reliability that you talked about, Tracey, is the same equation advisors live with. An advisor spends a lot of time building up that mechanical reliability, building the trust, so that when the fear rises, the client can give way to the advisor. I'm nervous, but I trust you, kind of thing. If that trust isn't there, the fear takes over, emotions rule, bad decisions are made, and performance suffers. So it's a fantastic and timely discussion today, Tracey. Thank you, and I hope everyone enjoyed the update. Look forward to you joining us next time, and in the meantime, please take care and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Escala Partners Perspectives podcast. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. You can connect with Tracey by visiting escalapartners.com.au. Escala Partners is a corporate authorized representative of Escala Wealth Management, which holds its own AFSL. This podcast has been prepared without consideration of specific client investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is for general information purposes only. Please don't rely on it for the purpose of making an investment decision. You should seek independent financial and taxation advice prior to making any investment decisions in relation to any of the content considered in the podcast, and consider any relevant disclosure documents. If you require any further information regarding the matters discussed on the podcast, please contact Escala Partners.